Welcome to AI for Good, the leading action-oriented global and inclusive United Nations platform on AI. Organized by ITU in partnership with 40 UN sister organizations and co-convened with Switzerland. The goal of AI for Good is to identify practical applications of AI to advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and scale those solutions for global impact. In today's session, we're counting on you to use the live video wall feature to ask questions and post comments to help create an engaging discussion. We encourage you to stay until the end, as we will hold a 30-minute networking session in the neural network. Here you can meet, ask questions to our distinguished speakers, connect, and chat with the AI for Good community. It is now time to kick off the session and welcome our first speaker. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. And a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from me as well. I am Frits Bussemaker. I chair the Institute for Accountability in the Digital Age, but for the next 60 minutes, I will be the moderator of this session. So today we're going to listen to the very first keynote of 2022 of AI for Good. And as the UN declared this the decade of execution, I'm very happy that we're going to follow a discussion, a keynote, which is going to take us along 100 ways artificial intelligence can change our world. And with us, we have Beena Ammanath, Executive Director of the Global Deloitte AI Institute. So Beena, welcome on board.
Thank you, Fritz, and happy to be here with you and your audience.
Beena, tell us, where are you based at the moment?
I am based in the San Francisco Bay Area, so it is 7 a.m. for me.
7 a.m. Well, I really hope you have a very large cup of coffee. Although it is exciting, it's also very early in the morning. So for you at least. So you're going to present us 100 ways artificial intelligence can change our world. That's going to be a 30-minute presentation. And afterwards, she's going to be joined by 3 of her colleagues from around the world. We'll introduce those colleagues after the presentation. And to the audience, I do hope that you'll join the discussion. And to get you started, please enter in the chat where you are currently at, so we have an overview how many people are watching and where they're watching from. Hopefully the audience will share that as much as possible. Beena, in the meantime, quick introduction. So you're based out of San Francisco. You're working for Deloitte at the moment. What is your main focus of the Institute?
Yes, the Institute is really focused on bringing to light how AI is applied in large enterprises across the world. And we look at it from a very pragmatic approach, not just obviously today I'm talking about all the goodness that AI brings, but there are risks associated. Every, value created, there are negative impacts, whether that is around ethics or compliance, right? So we look at all the dimensions of the use of AI in enterprises from every aspect.
Okay, one question before I give you the floor. You mentioned enterprises. That means you are focused on business or also other organizations and institutes?
Businesses, governments, nonprofits, any organization using AI.
Okay, now audience, expect quite a ride, because in the next 30 minutes, Beena is truly going to present 100 ways AI can change our world. So again, Beena, the floor is yours, and the audience, please share your questions if you have them. Thank you.
So here we go. AI can monitor environmental changes and measure energy waste. It can predict and prioritize where the most poverty is and that needs the most economic aid. AI can create better diagnosis and treatment tools in healthcare. It can identify early outbreaks of diseases. AI can build personalized learning plans that can be used as a tool in classroom to optimize teachers' time. It can help find new sources of water. AI can help nonprofits drive maximum impact with minimum resources so that we can actually see a lot of good coming out into the world. AI can reduce homelessness by connecting the homeless population with existing living solutions. It can track, analyze, and address gender and racial inequalities. It can monitor for progress. AI can redirect talent to work on breakthrough philanthropic innovations and match a person's interest with where there are opportunities to do more societal impact work. AI can assist healthcare coordinators to streamline health processes. AI can help educators spend more time with students on more difficult questions by taking care of the mundane tasks. AI can help grocery workers analyze data to determine where there will be shortages and address it more proactively. It helps social workers identify risk factors via looking at human behavioral patterns. AI provides real-time medical information for EMS, emergency medical services, and firefighters who need that information to address patient care immediately. AI can increase reliability and performance of public transportation. AI can improve crop harvest in the agriculture industry. It can reduce mundane tasks in finance. It optimizes delivery routes for goods and saves time and fuel. AI can support conservation of endangered species and can help fight the spread of disinformation. AI can identify the most vulnerable sections of a city's infrastructure so that you are more prepared for natural disasters. AI can preserve bee populations and hives and generate personalized health plans. It can also automate wealth management and put together a personalized wealth management plan for you. AI can help find affordable travel options to help bring families together no matter where they want to go. AI can improve consumer outreach. It can detect fraud in healthcare claims. It can detect anomalies in account reconciliation. AI can predict hospital readmissions based on the patient care and prior history. AI can facilitate the safe transportation of cargo, goods, and materials in an optimized way. AI can ensure accurate loan processing by removing manual steps within the process. AI can automate document classification, and don't we all need this? AI can forecast product revenues. AI can help ease mergers and acquisitions by taking care of a lot of the paperwork. AI can detect fraud in assistance programs provided by governments and philanthropic organizations. AI can increase the life of large machinery by proactively identifying service requirements and addressing it. AI can improve risk assessment methodologies in the insurance industry. AI can predict and prevent suicides by tapping more closely into mental health care solutions. AI can detect unknown cyber threats and attacks, and it can help fight against child labor. AI can automate the completion of reports and forms and can also improve customer support by providing personalized care. AI can automate network security tests, and it can help retain top talent. AI can prevent flight delays by predicting jet engine failure or machine failure and proactively fixing it. AI can predict forest fires and helps really prevent it. AI can optimize sales, margin, and inventory. AI can improve demand planning and forecasting, which we need right now. AI can create a contactless customer experience, and this has been so helpful for all of us in the past 2 years. AI can enable autonomous stores, and it can also enable autonomous driving. AI can make fashion smarter and help you find your best fit automatically. AI can transform wearable devices into our own personal health monitors. AI can improve access to mental health care by identifying those who need it the most and the resources that's available. AI can prevent illegal logging, and help with our environmental sustainability. AI can analyze real-time field sensor data from machines and provide better service. AI can sense and alert workers to dangerous working conditions no matter where they are. AI can predict power outages and help us plan for it. AI can accelerate the development of life-saving materials and chemicals. AI can optimize transportation routes in the event of natural disasters. AI can create digital sandboxes for manufacturing. And have you heard of digital twins in manufacturing? AI can create virtual plant operator assistants to help the manual factory workers from dangerous situations. AI can detect transactional and account takeover fraud in the system. AI can enhance insurance underwriting and risk evaluation automatically. AI can automate trade reconciliation and operational exceptions remediation. AI can power biometric digital payments and the facial recognition on your phone, which is used to unlock your phone. AI can reward safe drivers. It can help predict, prevent, detect insurance fraud. AI can assess credit worthiness and can improve real estate estimates. It can predict risk for food insecurity and addiction to take preventive steps. It can prevent, diagnose, and treat diseases. It can optimize benefit offerings to improve the employee work experience at employer sites. It can identify health and environmental patterns and changes. AI can proactively detect potential security threats and mitigate it. AI can monitor and maintain an entire city's infrastructure. AI can accelerate legal case resolution and create adaptive learning experiences for all our children. It can analyze social media complaints to improve your product design and packaging. It can automate the analysis and aggregation of data for risk and compliance issues. Improve the patient engagement lifecycle at every step of the way. It can automate healthcare claim submissions and diagnose medical conditions more efficiently and accurately. AI can proactively diagnose, prevent, and treat for future illnesses based on your historical illness. AI can analyze and forecast peaks and valleys in hospital patient volume to be able to do better hospital bed management. It can accelerate the discovery of innovative treatments and facilitate a virtualized drug discovery lab. AI can enable affordable housing for those that need it the most. AI can support nurses through AI-powered patient monitoring. It can predict clinical trial participant participation to get the right participants into the trial. It can aid pathologists in disease prevention. AI can enhance diagnostic images in radiology, and it can also generate a smart factory and digital supply network with its help. AI can manage customer relationships and make them better. It can help detect fake media accounts. AI can translate verbal and written statements from one language to another for ease of communication. AI can facilitate digital data flow for clinical trials. AI can maximize factory yield and manufacturing productivity. AI can help identify and rescue human trafficking victims. And there they are, and there are many more ways that AI is being used and can be used for doing good. Over to you, Fritz.
Beena, thank you so much for sharing, a true variety of ways AI can change our world. Now, for the audience, I had the convenience to have a look at your presentation before today. And what I've noticed is that actually all 17 SDGs are covered in your presentation. So I've counted over 60 examples of solutions which you can relate to one or more SDGs. And the rest I would more qualify in a business-focused area, which is good. So I'd like to have a closer look at what you've presented, because I really like to know than how it's done. But we're going to do that with 3 of your colleagues, and it's now time to introduce 3 of those colleagues. So I'd like to open the floor to also introduce Björn Brickman, Managing Director, AI Institute in Germany, Prashant Kari, and Sulabh Sorel. So guys, welcome to the panel discussion. Björn, where are you based?
I'm based in the capital of hearts in Munich, southern Germany. I'm just looking at the Alps, nice sunset here compared to Beena's.
Very nice. Don't make the rest of the audience jealous. And the audience, by the way, is a true global audience from around the world, 4 continents present. Kari, where are you based?
I'm based also in the southern part, but of India. So I'm in a city called Bangalore. Okay,
so it's a good afternoon, actually a good evening to you. Thank you. Sulabh.
Hello.
So
I'm based in sunny London.
Sunny London.
Today.
Good. So we have a true global coverage. So everybody, one of the things which I found interesting when I did an assessment of the presentation, which Beena just gave, was that I've counted over 20 of the examples, so 1/5, is in healthcare. Now, is this a sample bias, or is healthcare really leading AI today? Who would like to pick up that question? Well, Beena, I'm going to direct this to you. You presented it, so do you have a statement?
Yeah, from what I've seen, I've certainly seen, AI is farther ahead in the industries that have been traditionally data rich. So healthcare is certainly leading this way, and along with financial services, because they have been traditionally very data rich, and AI needs that data, right? So that's why it is part of the bias comes from the fact that AI is being used more eminently in those industries, and hence there is more goodness coming out of it. The other fact, Fritz, is also, AI and its influence on healthcare has come to the forefront in the last 2.5 years, right? It's been on, we've all been living through this interesting times where healthcare has been on top of mind. And so there is obviously more attention paid to it.
Good. Okay. Now,
Fritz, I would like to add just to sort of Beena said, and I would like to say that healthcare and life sciences, right? So there's a lot to be discovered yet, right? There's a lot of data. We have genomics data, we have proteomics data, so many different data sources, and there's a lot to be discovered in terms of fighting diseases like cancer. And how do you sort of give the best to the patients? So I think it's I would call it it's the delivery of healthcare plus basically the life sciences sort of ecosystem that's basically seeing a big push with AI.
Good observation. It's indeed one of the big burning platforms. There's a real need to solve those questions in healthcare. So thank you for that feedback. Björn, may I come to you? Now, we're talking to the directors of various AI institutes around the world. Do all these institutes do the same, or do you have a very specific focus based on where you are on the geography?
Can I say both?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we collaborate globally, right? As you can see here on this page, but obviously we're in different places of the world. So we kind of get a sense of what's happening locally. And can bring this back. I think we do operate slightly differently, but with the same global goal that we push AI forward for good.
Okay. Now, Kari, question for you. How is AI different in India, where you're based, compared to the States or Europe? Is there a difference?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and there's a lot of also my own hypothesis as well as a lot that I've been reading. There's a historical context, right? Both, I mean, India as well as broader, maybe if I may include APAC as a broader region. Obviously, this part has 60% of the world's population with over 4 billion people, maybe, but not as maybe in historically in wealth terms over the last 50, 100 years as much, right? So some of the investments into data systems, into data collection, connectivity, and so on and so forth were somewhat limited, right? So instead of and that being a challenge, one of the ways that the region has actually responded is saying, can we actually leapfrog and move into the world of AI directly rather than go, sort of step by step? And therefore, it's very interesting that a lot of articles and reports actually mention that perhaps the biggest investment globally is going to be in the Asia Pacific region in AI, right, going forward. And just to sort of, from an India perspective, right, and I think we did mention about healthcare. So maybe a couple of examples about some of the things which are happening in healthcare and beyond. So obviously, health, from an India perspective, one of the views that we look at is that a significant portion of the population is also, one healthcare incident away from poverty, right? So how do we, for example, we have a tertiary care system that we have launched, which is perhaps the world's largest health insurance system, which is called, it's called Ayushman Bharat, which has approximately 500 million beneficiaries, right? So it is imperative, therefore, that whether we are looking at utilization of various sort of facilities, whether it's processing of claims, standardization of protocols, whether it's, obviously fraud and how to sort of ensure that the dollar goes farthest, it's very important and imperative that AI is used. And hence, I mean, it becomes an obvious choice to use AI. Similarly, across multiple other factors, right? So for example, financial inclusion, reduction of corruption, etc. Right? So for each of these, there are, very, very significant advances that are being made, where AI is being used on a daily basis, and the acceptance is high because there's no alternative of a reasonably efficient, automated mechanism to fall back on.
Yeah. Okay, Beena, I see you nodding. So do you also recognize this in your part of the world?
Yes, absolutely, and everything Kadi said is so true, because the scale of the opportunity, right? It's and it all, at the end of the day, it all comes down to what kind of data is available, and I was nodding because there is legacy that needs to be addressed, and going back to your earlier question. Part of the reason something like, say, manufacturing or an IoT industry, a traditional industrial company, lags behind is because it's not been as focused on gathering digital data. Data is more distributed on papers and put into manual files. So there is a whole effort that needs to be put into just digitization to be able to get to that step of AI. And to Kadi's point, they're almost bypassing that step because that legacy doesn't exist, which is a very interesting observation.
And that's actually a good point also for the audience. So I think the message here is not just to focus on getting AI from a narrow perspective or a narrow definition of what AI is, but making certain that the whole infrastructure, providing AI what it needs, data, to be collected, that also needs to put in place. So I was just wondering, Sulabh or Bjorn, do you have any insights, or can you show us what kind of technologies should we look for to make certain that we have everything in place to allow AI to deliver what its promises?
Yeah, let me pick the example that Beena is talking about, right? So manufacturing, right? So the first thing is data collection. Now you have seen, back to the point, like financial services has a lot of data, because not only are they historically rich, data rich, information industry, but today a lot of financial services is digitized, so it's easy to collect data. But if you look at agriculture, if you look at manufacturing, there are hardly any data collection methodologies. So there's a first technology you need to look at. I wouldn't say it's first, but the in terms of data collection is IoT, right? And the second bit is basically how once you've collected data, how do you scale AI? How do you where does it run? And that's where, like, different forms of substrate on cloud come. Like, maybe in the future, we are talking about sort of like, quantum computing. Today, certainly, like, HPC is like high performance computing is becoming very big, because a lot of the AI that we train are on different types of chips, like not only CPUs, but for example, GPUs. So there is definitely that substrate, or where we or like different type of ways we compute things, computation, like quantum computing and all. And the third, I do think that technologies, I'm not saying it's going to be blockchain, but technologies like blockchain are going to be a fundamental part of this ecosystem. And I say that because there is going to, we see a movement that you need some form of technology like blockchain, not only to sort of secure data, but also perhaps secure enhanced privacy. So with edge computing and those kind of things. So I sort of like, I see those sort of like, technology sort of patterns.
Great. Now, I think the awareness, the complexity of implementing AI, that's, I think, well noted. So given the fact that we have about a half an hour left, I'm going to move on to a couple of other topics. I have so many questions for you people. And Bjorn, on this last topic on AI and looking at the regional perspective, do you think all regions in the world will move at the same pace?
I would hope so, but I doubt not. I mean, we've just heard, and sometimes maybe I feel a bit stuck in the middle here in Europe, right? We're too far ahead to leapfrog, and we're probably not at the front at the moment, right? At least if you look at technology perspective. And I think that being said, I think there are many different dimensions we move in, right? So there's a lot of discussion on ethics and privacy certainly going on in Europe, as in the rest of the world. But if I look at my home here in Germany, so to speak, I at least have the feeling that privacy is one of the top topics, which may not be so much discussed in other places where maybe, the pressure on getting the food next day is a lot more urgent than if your neighbor knows about your credit card number, right? So I think there's a lot of different dimensions we move along in different areas of the world. So which I think is a good thing, because if we would all just, I don't know, develop the next big neural network at all places at the same time, we just get a lot of redundancy, probably too much, and leave behind many other things.
Okay, so that also could mean that you can use other parts of the world, like a living lab, just see how they do it, and then you pick up the good parts.
Living lab sounds a little bit like you put the risks somewhere else, right? But yeah, of course, I mean, there's going to be exploration in many places, right? So if I just listen to the healthcare part, obviously there's move in healthcare here as well, right? But the question here is probably more, when can I best schedule my next appointment at the doctor, rather than how do I get a doctor in the first place, right? Where, again, AI can help, but on a different level, different way.
Okay, now we already discussed that AI is one of the leading, healthcare is one of the leading industries where AI is being applied. But for the next 5 to 3 years, what are the other industries where we're going to see a huge use of AI? Beena, I see you nodding. What's the runner-up?
And we have a whole report around it, which we've done at the global level, where we've looked at current and future use cases by different industries. I do think healthcare and financial services will continue to lead the way, but we are seeing significant progress in the consumer industry. And to Bjorn and Sulabh's point, as new technologies are emerging and we see them blending together, whether it is a focus on metaverse or NFTs, AI is a common thread that weaves across it, and we're going to see new business models evolve across different spaces. The one that I am personally very excited about is, looking at those industries which have existed for centuries and we have not necessarily put the attention we need to. And if you see, I just had one which was on agriculture, right, and food, but that is so crucial. So my hope is we focus on those industries which are core to, all humans at every level. Whether it's agriculture or education, we are seeing more and more entry into personalized education, which will be, which is being able to enable the entire world population with education is for me, one of the best things that we as a generation can do, right?
Good.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually a nice segue to the next topics, because we have 3 more topics I'd like to discuss with you.
Oh.
And definitely also looking at how we're going to get the future generations involved. But before we do that, I would like to go into another topic associated. That's the other side of the coin, because so far we've covered the promises, the benefits of what it could bring. But I'd like each of you to make a brief statement on what are the risks associated with AI, and when it comes to technology and the governance of technology. And I'm also asking this question now as the chair of the Institute for Accountability, because I am aware that you're going to get different answers dependent on which region you're coming from. So Sula, Björn, one and two are going to represent Europe in this case, but I'd like to ask each of you, what are the risks associated with AI, and are they global risks or local risks? And maybe, Kari, can we start in India? You're part of the world.
Sure, absolutely. So I think maybe at a high level, I think the biggest risk for AI is to be able to, especially if AI is to be used for good, is to ensure transparency, explainability, and etc. So to make sure that people, the people at large are willing to accept the outcomes or outputs that AI gives. Right? But more specifically, I think there are multiple frameworks that need to go in. Obviously, the biases that can get further that already exist in society, right? Because data will be a reflection of the situations that exist, right? So, and just to give that example, right, when Rafael Nadal was 2 sets down, there was this whole tweet saying, there's a 96% chance that he will lose, but he came back and won, right? Which is, sort of the human endeavor to actually change the outcome irrespective of which direction it is going. And therefore, in our, efforts to become better societies, etc., I think, that is very important. Okay. The other, I think the second point, which I think Björn did mention, was, about privacy, etc. I think that's going to be huge in terms of where do we draw the line of what constitutes consent, and how much will I consent to somebody actually interfering and listening in on my private conversations, or etc. Right? And last but not least, I think is also a legal framework, right? And as we get into more and more autonomous intelligence specifically, and the classic example being, if 2 autonomous cars collide, then whom do you blame, right? So and who fights the cases in that case? So I think these are significant risks, and obviously both companies which embrace AI need to be cognizant and manage this risk, as well as governments and public utilities, public services, which needs to be even more cognizant, because that can be, a bigger perception problem that can derail significantly the whole, adoption of technology in the country.
Kari, thank you so much for sharing those 3 areas of concern. You also pointed something out, which is a great bridge for me to go to Beena again, because I forgot to mention, you are the author of an upcoming book on trustworthy AI. So you are the ideal person to answer this question, or reply to this question.
Oh, I'll say it's a team effort. I've learned from everybody across the globe, and that's what shaped the book as well. We actually had a global editorial board reviewing and providing their feedback, because I wanted to bring that lens of, this is not a localized problem, and we shouldn't address it in terms of, from a very local, narrow lens. We have to think about, when we talk about AI ethics and bias and everything that Kadi mentioned, it means different things in different industries, and even within that industry in different use cases, right? Explainability, for example, means whether you're explaining how a model works to a data scientist is going to be very different than whether you're explaining it to your end consumer or to your board, right? So I think there are nuances that companies need to think about. And when I say companies, I mean every organization using AI, they need to think about the ethical risk, the risk that's associated with losing trust when they are using AI and address it proactively. So we go beyond bias and think about, whether it is robustness of the algorithm. Can the algorithm go rogue? Privacy. Do you what does privacy mean in the context of patient care versus what does privacy mean in the context of, say, hospital bed allocation? Right? Those are very different parameters there, and how you define privacy or how you define transparency in those cases are going to be different, right? So my book is coming out next month, and I'm very excited to share, because it's also, thanks to my colleagues from across the globe, but also my experiences having worked in different organizations. I've worked in financial services, in retail, in manufacturing, and I do believe that ethics needs to be looked at from a very industry specific lens and looked at a global level.
Global, but also local level, as the ethics change per culture. I also would like to, Beena, thank you so much for your reply there. Sulabh or Bjorn, what's your take on the risks of AI?
I think one risk, like on top, so to speak, of what Kari mentioned, right? Like privacy and so on. Yeah. I think one is that AI can easily influence, right? Because it can easily tailor approaches to every single individual. And with this comes the opportunity and the risk of nudging people either in the right direction or, in the right direction for somebody, right?
Okay, can you give us some examples of where it's been used, right or wrong?
That's going to be a hard cut to make, but let's just say if you go to any online platform, right? Like classically, you would read media from a newspaper, right? You would get any story that's in there. You basically have to filter yourself. Now, this is now in a convenient, but also somewhat risky way done by systems, right? That try to figure out what's interesting for you, because their incentive is mostly to keep you on the platform as long as possible. So they'll try to show you things that you're interested in and you probably agree with or hardly disagree with, right? To kind of, keep you on the platform for longer. And this will hide quite a bit of what's actually in the real world. So it will strongly bias, if you like, or strongly skew the perception from what you receive or see on any of these platforms, in fact, versus what's actually happening out there.
Okay. Now, I want to pick that up and then go to Sulabh. Just ask you the opportunity to answer the following question. To what extent is AI moving too fast for a person, for an individual? We see the possibilities of AI as being presented is so big. What can we do as humans to keep up with that development? And is that maybe a risk as we're lagging in understanding what AI is capable of? What's your take?
Fritz, is that question for me?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very interesting question, and certainly what I call it is it can be a good cycle of acceleration, and it can also be a vicious cycle of acceleration, right? So I think one thing for sure is that right at the outset, AI is between us, amongst the I'm saying the normal public. I'm talking as a normal person, not as a practitioner. AI is amongst us already, right? So it's just that a lot of the AI we use in everyday lives is in the back end, right? So whether it be intelligent smart apps or it be us sort of getting smart sort of text kind of nudges. So it's already in the back end. I think that is what worries me a lot, because front end AI or AI such as avatars or chatbots, most of us know that you're talking to something inorganic, but when you talk about back-end AI, we don't really understand, and that's where these problems that something that Bjorn just said creeps up. How your data is collected, how it is basically in the back end, how it is sort of crunched, and how it nudges you. So I think the main thing it is moving fast, but education and transparency, whether it be by corporate social responsibility, whether it be by pressure groups, whether it be by government and regulation, is really required. Education and transparency. I'm a part of a few panels and forums and committees, in the UK, and I have sort of like, I've had the opportunity to look at how, from the sidelines, how the national AI strategy was built. And one of the very interesting observations that I heard from some of the advisory board was that, how about we start educating our children about AI, or what AI is? I don't know what shape that will take, but what AI is, or how it's going to like impact us or whatever, from early on, rather than basically like, in adulthood, and because that really helps think about how do you interact with social media, how do you sort of utilize, I don't know, Alexa. So it's and I don't want to basically call upon names here, but what I'm trying to say is that how do you interact with these different types of things that are there. So I think definitely that's one thing we need to sort of think about.
Good. Okay. No, that's very good insight to share. Panel, I'm going to move to the next topic. We're going to come back to the UN Sustainability Development Goals. As mentioned, it's a decade of execution. Now, presented in the 100 solutions, well, the majority is in healthcare. So a lot of effort is in healthcare. But can you share me your insights where you believe AI is going to have the biggest impact? Because Beena, as you mentioned, there was only one slide on food production, but that has a huge impact if used successfully. So without looking at the numbers, what's your assessment? What's going to be the biggest impact? And could it differ from for each region you're coming from? Beena, may I ask you to reply on that?
Yeah, I think education is the ed tech space is ripe for a disruption. We've been too long in the era, where it's been one person teaching. I grew up in a time when there were 67 students in one classroom, right? My son goes to a classroom where there are 20 students. But it's one-to-many relationship. And I think the true power of AI is to make it personalized, because every person learns differently. And so being able to provide that personalized education, helping kids figure out early on which path they want to go down, that will be great. But also the biggest opportunity is to reach the most remote parts of the world where education has not been easily available or accessible. I think that's a big opportunity that we have. So I think education, EdTech is going to have the most impact, and I'm personally rooting for it.
Good. Okay. Björn, is there a difference in Europe? Or would you get the same answer?
It's a hard question for Europe, to be honest, I think. But just to add on Beena's, I think education is in general a great thing, and there AI can help. But I think it's important to focus on providing education, not controlling education, right? Because once you put AI in there, you might very easily also fall into the trap if you like to basically control every student, right? And that's probably exactly the opposite of what you want. Looking at Europe, it's hard to say what the biggest impact will be. But what I've seen quite a bit is, we're one of the biggest consumers of electricity or energy in general, right? And the move to how they call it, sustainable energy, that's the biggest discussion is always there's no constant delivery, right? But we have a constant need. And there, I believe AI can play a big role to kind of balance between demand and what's being provided in terms of energy. And I would hope that would be reasonably easy actually to implement, probably simplifying some things here, and have a rather big impact, like when there is a system that controls when my washing machine will start, that is when the energy is there. I don't need it now, right? Probably for heating, the same thing, cooling my fridge. I don't think that needs energy the whole day, right? So why wouldn't it just run when there's enough wind?
Yeah.
So I would hope there's some things, but there's certainly stuff around mobility or sustainable cities in general as well. But Sulap, you might have your city better view on that.
I have an observation because it's quite an interesting sort of conundrum. There's a couple of researchers say that actually one of the largest and increasing consumers of electricity are data centers. So we also need to think very carefully about, in our goals of sustainability, we start using AI everywhere. How is that going to be? Because we need sort of data, right? We need to store data, whether we are running electricity grids or not. Disproportionate use of AI for sustainability may also cause a problem, because data centers consume a lot of, like the current sort of consumption of data centers is cumulatively, and that was 2019, data, is higher than some major Western European countries. So you think about now, post-COVID, when more of the world is digitized, there's a lot more consumption. So I think that's where I think there's a lot of emphasis and new type of sort of investments that I've seen in European startups and wider startups in the Western world is on efficient AI. And I think that's where you would see focus, because it's going to be used for sustainability. But how do you have efficient systems?
Okay. Now, I'm going to come back to the original question, if I may, Sulabh, and that is biggest impact.
Yeah.
How it's going to make a difference. I understand the efficient AI part, but you can skip the question if you want. I can move to Kari, but or maybe come back to you later. But just, what's the impact you hope for it's going to give us?
I think in the UK, definitely it's the healthcare system. Definitely.
Okay, good answer. Thank you, Kari.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a tough one to choose, right? So and because some of these are very, very closely linked, I think maybe poverty and maybe hunger and poverty are very closely linked. I think that's perhaps the one thing which, at least from a sort of a developing world perspective, I hope we actually eliminate completely, right? Like real hunger. Will it, what are the other ones which can actually have very significant impact? Education, no doubt, because I think that's sort of one vehicle which can break this sort of vicious cycle of being lower on a lot of sustainable development. But I suspect, for example, clean water, sustainable cities, etc., huge. Whereas maybe, in some other areas may not be as much of relevance, given where some of these countries are at the moment, especially I would say parts of Africa and parts of Asia.
You've started to answer a question I haven't asked yet, and that was who is able to answer on those regions not represented today, because we have whole continents, South America, Africa. How can we avoid the digital gap, the digital divide being bigger? And what can we do to reduce that gap as much as possible?
So maybe I'll take a stab, and my other co-panelists can add. And let me tell you that at least I have a lot of experience of the African continent. I've been to the continent maybe 40 times in my life, as to do a lot of work out there. Asia is perhaps a little bit, on a path which is, I would say, on many parameters, a few years ahead of Africa, right? But Africa is also following the same path. So if I look at, for example, Kenya or some of the other countries, the revolution that has happened in financial inclusion, for instance, through the use of mobile phones has been incredible, right? And it's been a storied case study that's gone around the whole world. So similarly, across both, Africa as well as parts of South America and far-flung regions of Asia, right, where we still have those challenges. To remember, for example, West Asia, Afghanistan is still part of Asia, for instance, is, the lack of human resources, the lack of, for example, availability of data, which can potentially be, let's say, circumvented by having mobile phones which can take images, by the ability to actually leapfrog, as we were talking about, right? Using digital to reduce, corruption, to ensure benefits are targeted and focused and reach the right people. I believe that AI and in the broader digital ecosystem actually provides that mechanism to achieve some of these goals in a compressed period of time, rather than, decades that it might have taken in the earlier paradigms, right? So I think it's an opportunity of a lifetime where we can act, and I believe that certainly the African continent, with my experience, is on that path, though it might be a few years behind Asia.
Okay, so Björn, hopefully maybe Europe is the living lab for Africa. We show them how it could be done and how it's not done.
The first thing is everybody knows what the mute button is. Yeah, so certainly, and I think there are some things that go on in Africa and all places, right? Like if you look at South Africa, that's probably not too different from what Kadi just mentioned, right? There's a lot of mobile payments, and that's obviously spread over all Africa. And sometimes I'm quite jealous when I need to make a transaction. I'm just, well, there's so many things I need to do. Why can I not just swipe on my phone? So that's a leapfrogging. I can feel it. On the other hand, the danger, so to speak, I see in the leapfrogging is that they might skip some of the guardrails, right, when doing this. Like you jump right into, let's just stay with the micropayments in there, and that's probably controlled by fraud and whatnot. And then you may want to have, at least from a European perspective, a closer look at what's done with the data, right? So doing this leapfrogging, I think, is a great chance, but it shouldn't be done neglecting all the risks. May I just highlight one thing on the risks, because we've been talking a lot about risks of AI, being privacy, ethics, and so on. I think there's one big risk of AI, which is often overlooked, which is the risk of not using it. So the opportunity cost, I think that's pretty big and should not be neglected, right? So it's not like we just leave it and we're good. We need to find the middle ground.
Hey, Björn, thank you so much for saying that, because that actually is a good introduction to the last topic of today's discussion. And that is, how are we going to get the next generation involved? How are we going to make certain that all these great ideas we're now thinking of actually are going to be passed on to the next generation? Is this a threat? If so, how are we going to mitigate that? How are we going to get them involved?
As a mother of two teenagers, I can say that they're already ahead of us in a lot. My biggest concern is, they obviously have, the privilege, right? And of being around, and hearing things about AI. And, I worry about the digital divide and digital gap more, because it's more about how do you make the next generation everywhere aware and involved. And that's, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's that education that we need to push forward. And that's really up to our generation, the ones who have the privilege of being close to AI. We need to take on that responsibility to make sure that we get everybody on this journey, and not just as users and consumers, but as builders and creators, as the ones who have an informed voice. And I think, that we've seen it among our kids, but getting the rest of the kids on journey is through education, and by really targeting the areas where they don't have it.
Okay, got that. Thank you. Kadi, anything, how would you involve the next generation in a young nation as India?
Absolutely, fantastic question. So, interestingly, my other perspective is that for us, AI is not very new, right? It's been around for 5 or 6 decades. Actually, it has taken us and supporting technologies this much of time for us to get here. And I believe that now where we are, the next 5 or 6 decades are going to be vastly, unrecognizable from where we are, right? 2 or 3 points quickly about the younger generation, right? Their savviness in dealing with AI-powered devices and solutions is far better than, for probably that, and how quickly they get it is and adopt to a new sort of a way of working is phenomenally better than us. The second thing is, I believe that, given various other forms of AI, which is, for instance, conversational AI, which has come about, it is no longer. So the next billion who actually come onto the internet and take, partake in the benefits need not actually be able to read and write, but may be able to, if they have good command over the written language. So I am actually less worried about the digital divide as much as we were worried about, in the last 25 years. Okay. And last but not least, I believe that this coming generations, as long as we are able to sort of occupy them meaningfully, because I think the challenge is going to be in that, given there's so much change that's happening in the world. How do we skill and ensure that their longer term employability? I think that's the challenge that we need to worry about.
Okay.
And through education.
Yeah. So Björn, Sulabh, do you recognize that worry, or are you more on Beena's side? The next generation is already there.
I'll go very quickly on this. I think the next generation is already there because they're living in the age of AI. I think I actually I concur with I do, by the way, concur on the digital divide, because if you think about large parts of the world, education is not we don't have schools in many areas, and the density of schools is low. So definitely there's a risk of digital divide. And the other thing, but I also concur with what Prashant said, which is about sort of the worry that when you do bridge this digital divide, and as AI basically is more and more prevalent in our lives, how are you going to reskill so many people into doing something meaningful? And that's the main point. One of the risks you've not covered is the risk of politicians making policies in a gradual, but yet in a manner that it's not last moment. And we need to start thinking about that now, because this transition is going to create risks.
So basically, if I summarize what you're saying us, it's not that we have to be concerned about the younger generation understanding and catching up. It's actually by us, our generation, catching up with that development. So people on the panel, may I ask you maybe some final takeaways, if you have any, before we move to the neural network? Any last comments? Björn, do you have a last statement you'd like to share with the audience? Some insights based on today's discussion?
I think interesting discussion, even though I know my colleagues, right? But it's really coming in more and more visible that these are all global challenges, right? And none of these can be solved like in a city or even in a country, or maybe a bit more on a continent, but ideally on a global scale. And be it education in Africa, or fear in Europe, or privacy in the US, I don't know. I think these are in roughly the same challenges we have all over the planet. And especially if you look at the SDGs, I mean, they're also global challenges, right? So bringing them together is probably best done by coming together and sharing.
Good point. That's also the reason why we're having this conversation, sharing that knowledge and insight. Now, if I may, in the final minute, Beena, we started with you. I'd like to end with you, if I may. Any takeaways, final thoughts for this audience?
Yes, look, there is a lot of good that AI can do. I consider myself a pragmatic optimist. That means there is a lot of good that AI can do, but there are also risks associated, and it is up to us to, make sure that we are addressing both with equal vigor, energy, and scale.
Great. Thank you so much for ending on that note. So, Beena, thank you for being the first keynote of 22. I want to thank Björn, Sulabh, Kari to be on the panel, sharing your insights, sharing that with the audience. I want to share also, thank you the people from the ITU in the back office to make this a success. Now, we're going to close this part of the session. I'm going to hand this back to Anna, and then we'll see you all in a couple of minutes on the other side of the neural network, because I'm certain you have a lot of questions, how it's been done, and then you can talk to all these panel members yourself. Thank you.
Thank you for participating in today's AI for Good session. We hope you've learned something new, innovative, and engaging in today's event. We now encourage you to continue the conversation on the live video wall in the neural network. Here you can ask questions, like and comment, share links, complete the satisfaction survey, connect with interesting profiles, or speak one-on-one using the chat and video function. After the 30-minute networking session, we invite you to explore the lobby, try the smart matching quiz, visit the virtual exhibits and poster boards, and build your personalized AI for Good program. It was a pleasure learning with you today. See you at the next AI for Good.